Technology does not change war by magic, it changes war by shifting who can see, who can guide, and who can still think clearly when everyone else is blind. Today is Saturday, 28th March 2026. There is a dangerous mistake people make when they hear a phrase like unjammable missile. They imagine a secret switch has been flipped, and suddenly one side has become invincible. But modern war does not work like that. What actually happens is often more unsettling. A system does not become unstoppable. It simply becomes harder to interrupt, harder to predict, and more expensive to defeat. That is why the real story behind China's BeiDou system and Iran's missile arsenal is not a cartoon headline about magic satellites. The real story is about guidance, resilience, and strategic independence. It is about what happens when a country long dependent on vulnerable pathways starts building alternatives that force its enemies to fight on worse terms. Now let's get one thing straight from the beginning. Publicly available evidence does not prove that Iran has suddenly made all of its missiles unjammable. And even the US-China Commission says open source evidence does not yet allow a definitive assessment of the extent to which Iran is using BeiDou for current missile and drone attacks. What the public record does show is that China gave Iran access to BeiDou-related military capability, that analysts believe this could be improving Iranian resilience against jamming, and that this possibility is being taken seriously because BeiDou is a world-class positioning, navigation, and timing system. That distinction matters because hype can make you blind. If you claim the Pentagon can't counter a threat that is still being studied, you sound dramatic but not credible. If instead you explain that Washington is facing a more complex electromagnetic battlefield, where Iran may now have better options than before, you sound sharper, more serious, and more dangerous. Because that version is actually closer to the truth. The foundation for this story was not laid yesterday. According to the US Institute of Peace's Iran Primer, Tehran and Beijing signed a deal in 2015. Allowing Iran to use China's BeiDou 2 navigation system, a rival to GPS that is useful for missiles and drones. And Iran got access to it in 2021 after the system became operational. That means this is not some overnight wartime improvisation. It is the continuation of a longer military technical relationship that was quietly maturing in the background, while most people were watching louder headlines. And that is where the strategic anxiety begins. The United States spent decades enjoying the advantage of owning the most famous satellite navigation system on Earth. GPS was not just a tool, it was an invisible layer of American power. It shaped aviation, commerce, logistics, and military precision all over the globe, which meant that any rival power seeking autonomy would eventually have to build a serious alternative. China did exactly that. The Office of the Director of National Intelligence described China's BeiDou constellation in its 2025 annual threat assessment as a world-class positioning, navigation, and timing capability that competes with US GPS, while also noting that China is improving the larger military architecture around it. That is not the language used for a toy network or a regional backup. That is the language used for a mature strategic system with military consequence. But a navigation system is only as terrifying as the battlefield in which it is used. In peacetime, satellites are convenient. In wartime, they become a contest over trust. Can the signal be received? Can the receiver authenticate it? Can the guidance package continue working under heavy interference? And can the weapon still reach roughly the right place when the electromagnetic environment turns hostile? That is why people are focusing on jamming. The Federal Aviation Administration has bluntly explained why civil GPS and GNSS signals are vulnerable. The signals are extremely weak, easily overpowered, and public services lack strong security protocols. In other words, satellite navigation is powerful, but it is not sacred. It lives in physics, and physics can be attacked. Even Chinese official messaging does not say BeiDou is immune. China's own reporting said Beijing had made breakthroughs. That made BeiDou more resistant to jamming, not unjammable. That wording is revealing. Because even the side selling the capability understands the difference between improved resilience and invulnerability. That difference should shape this conversation. That difference should shape this entire conversation. If Iran is gaining access to more resilient signal options, stronger authentication, or military-grade guidance pathways, then yes, Western and Israeli jamming efforts may become less effective in some scenarios, but less effective is not the same as useless. And harder to jam is not the same as impossible to jam. Serious analysis lives in those distinctions. So why has this topic exploded now? Because the current war environment has made the question urgent. Reuters reported in March 2026 that Iranian missiles and drones have continued striking crucial energy facilities in Gulf countries and the wider Middle East, and that the conflict has revealed just how difficult missile defense becomes when attacks are persistent. In that environment, even a modest improvement in guidance survivability can change the strategic conversation. Missile defense is not judged only by whether interceptions happen. It is judged by leakage, cost, tempo, and exhaustion. If a defender must spend more, deploy more, and accept more uncertainty, because the attacker's guidance chain is harder to disrupt than before, then the attacker has already achieved something important, even without total immunity. This is where the Pentagon problem becomes more subtle than the headline suggests. The Pentagon absolutely does have counters. The United States has jam-resistant GPS modernization underway, including M-code, and the US Space Force says GPS-3 satellites provide significantly more accurate capability. So the American side is not helpless, but the harder truth is that American dominance no longer means monopoly. When your adversaries operate their own mature navigation constellations, your old assumptions weaken. You can no longer rely on the idea that everyone serious must use your architecture. China has built an alternative, and that alternative is now part of the military balance. That is why this story is bigger than Iran. Iran is the battlefield case study, but China is the strategic author of the deeper shift. Beijing is proving that the future of power is infrastructure. Who owns the standards, who owns the timing, who owns the navigation backbone, and who can keep those systems alive under pressure? Think about the implications. A missile does not become more dangerous only because its warhead gets bigger. It becomes more dangerous when its path becomes more trustworthy under interference. It becomes more dangerous when its operators no longer fear that a foreign-controlled signal can be denied, corrupted, or switched off at the moment of launch. For decades, one of the quiet strategic strengths of the United States was control over global enabling systems. That control made sanctions sharper and coalition warfare easier. But the more those enabling systems get duplicated by rivals, the more the United States has to move from comfortable superiority to constant contestation. And contestation is expensive. Every improvement in Iranian strike resilience forces an answering investment in sensors, interceptors, electronic warfare, hardened communications, and layered defenses. Even when the attacker fails to achieve perfect accuracy, the defender still pays the bill for staying alive. That is one reason these technologies matter so much. They alter the economics of fear. Now let's address another myth. Many people hear satellite guidance and assume the missile is blindly obeying one signal. In reality, guidance involves combinations. Inertial navigation, terrain matching, terminal seekers, and correction logic. So if BeiDou is helping, it's more like a resilience layer embedded into a broader stack. Hybrid systems are harder to neutralize than single-point systems. If you jam one layer, the weapon may still retain enough inertial guidance to remain dangerous. If you degrade the satellite component, you may reduce precision without eliminating threat. That is exactly why analysts obsess over harder to jam. There is also a geopolitical layer most observers miss. China can expand influence without firing a single missile of its own. If another state uses Chinese navigation, Chinese communications, and industrial inputs, then Beijing increases strategic leverage while keeping plausible distance from direct combat. That is a very modern form of power. The US-China Commission put this in a careful way. It stated that China gave Iran full military access in 2021, but emphasized proof still does not allow definitive assessment. That is the kind of sentence smart analysts underline because it signals two truths. The pathway exists, and the public proof is still incomplete. This is not a reason to dismiss. When official assessments say a scenario is strategically meaningful and still not visible, that usually means the real debate is happening behind classified doors. The headline, "The Pentagon can't counter," is also misleading. Countering a threat does not mean finding one silver bullet. It means using many layers at once. cyber, kinetic interception, deception, electromagnetic attack, decoys, dispersal, hardening, rapid launch detection, and simply destroying the launcher. The United States can counter pieces, but each improvement on the other side makes that job harder, narrower, and more urgent. The deeper fear is not invincible missiles. The deeper fear is that US rivals are learning to combine enough independent infrastructure that old pressure points no longer work as reliably. A rival that can navigate without GPS, communicate through alternative channels, and manufacture through sanctions-resistant supply chains is a rival that absorbs punishment better. This resonates beyond the Middle East. America's adversaries only need to reduce the effectiveness of the tools Washington relies on. A world where sanctions bite less cleanly and satellite denial is less coercive. China is not only building strength, it is building competition around dependence. China also has counterspace capabilities intended to disrupt, damage, or destroy target satellites. Including electronic warfare systems and anti-satellite missiles, Beijing is playing both sides of the board, strengthening its own ecosystem while threatening everyone else's. That changes the psychological balance in war planning. US planners now have to think about the broader architecture enabling an adversarial coalition to coordinate and learn. Every missile that flies is not just a strike, it can also be a test, a data point, a lesson. Battlefield learning may be one of the most underappreciated parts of this story. Conflict reveals what survives interference, what loses lock, what arrives short, what fools radars, and what drains interceptors. The value of BeiDou is future refinement for China. This is why threat the Pentagon can't counter should really be reframed as threat the Pentagon can't dismiss. That is a much smarter sentence. It avoids the lazy trap. There is a lesson here about modern empire. In the 20th century, power looked like bases and flags. In the 21st, power looks like code, chips, and constellations. The United States fields the most formidable military, but rivals are building connective tissue that makes advantages more contestable. Contestability is the real strategic revolution. Washington will accelerate resilient PNT efforts, harden receivers, and diversify timing sources. None of that is panic, it is adaptation before the next crisis. Iran's advantage should not be romanticized. Better access does not erase manufacturing constraints, intelligence penetration, or the brutal arithmetic of sustained war. It simply improves one crucial part of the chain. But in war, improving one part can alter outcomes at the margin, and margins are where strategy lives. The danger is not perfect hits. The danger is that more missiles remain credible under stress, and defenders must assume that degraded guidance does not equal neutralized threat. This is explosive and symbolic. BeiDou represents Chinese refusal to remain dependent. Iran is participating in a larger geopolitical migration away from US-anchored systems. This won't be absolute. Every time a state proves it can navigate outside US architecture, the psychological aura of American inevitability weakens. Infrastructure competition matters more than television admits. Did China's BeiDou just make Iran's missiles unjammable? No. But did it likely make them more resilient, autonomous, and difficult to disrupt? Yes. This is closer to the evidence. Can the Pentagon counter it? Yes, but it is not a clean, one-button fix. It is an evolving contest in which every rival improvement forces a new American answer. That is the story, not invincible missiles or a helpless America, but a serious realization that the age of uncontested US infrastructure dominance is fading. China is building confidence. Wars are shaped by who can still see when signals are noisy, and who can still trust their machines when the sky is contested. BeiDou is the struggling front over who writes the operating system. If Washington is wise, it will treat this not as a viral headline, but as a warning. The future belongs to the nation that builds the deepest stack of resilient systems beneath the noise.